Hello everyone! For this video I used information from published books including the From the Ashes, but also listening to Anna B. Meyer on the Legend and Lore show, seen on Lord Gazumba's YouTube channel. If you liked the video, please tell a friend or share it online. Helping others find this lore is very much appreciated. I would like to thank all of you who have also subscribed to the channel and the website. I will keep trying to convince the other 40% watching my content to take the leap and join the league as well by smashing that subscribe button. Now, grab a drink, relax, and let's take a journey in Greyhawk. A young graduate scholar enters the library of the Grey College in the city of Greyhawk. She searches for a particular book that describes the region of the western shore of the Woolly Bay. Her search leads her to a heavy leather-bound book with on the first page a single sentence: "You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy." She starts reading parts of the history chapter. The Sul explorers who settled these lands some 2000 years ago were not the first to live on these shores. Before the coming of the first humans, elves populated these lands. Back then, a forest stretched from the Lord Mill Mountains to the Woolly Bay shores. Some records speculate that a millennia ago, the sea level used to be much lower and that completely intact elven settlements are still located off the coast, albeit somewhere between 100 and 300 feet deep. The human migrations and the many wars fought changed the lay of the land, however, and set in motion a catastrophic deforestation. It affected these shores as well, and the elves retreated from the shores into the deep forest of what we now know as Selene, or what remains of the original Great Elven Realm. The area of this coast evolved from ancient forest into being a fair but not particularly fertile rolling countryside. This region we now call the Wild Coast is given that name because neither an expanding Chaos Empire nor the Erdi monarchs of the Great Kingdom ever had full control over the region. The area has always managed to regain their freedom from their conquering neighbors, and although they are experts at rebellion, they are quite incapable of nationhood. There is no question that the Wild Coast and its 5 independent city-states is known throughout the Flanaess as a place of sanctuary for malcontents, dissidents, non-humans, outlaws and the outcasts of other states. Interestingly, the area gives rise to many outstanding people who were raised or fostered in this cutthroat atmosphere. Legendary natives of the Wild Coast include such persons as Canon, Robular and Tensor, to name but a few. The Wild Coast borders the well-known Woolly Bay, the relatively shallow western end of the Sea of Gernat. It is well documented as merchants have sailed here for centuries. Currently, an enormous volume of traffic passes through here, coming from inland regions of the Flanaess as far up as the Shieldlands. Today, in 585 of the common year, the waters are rife not only with pirates, but the current increase of orcish vessels are becoming a problem for the economy of many a country. The scholar pages through the book and stops at chapter Settlements. When the elves retreated from Karas Alreth, their moated fortress eventually fell into the hands of Sul mercenaries. They made it their base of operations and it was coveted by all. It was attacked time and again, and when peace and stability finally returned, most of the elven buildings were destroyed. Many Sul flocked to the banner of the mercenary lord, and the fort became a town, Elredd, and eventually grew to become a thriving city. A port of the same name was built a few miles east of the city. That area became a village unto itself as trade increased, and then became known as the Port of Elredd. Through its existence, Elredd has been a military city and continues to cater to mercenaries of all races. Elredd remained a free city until in 584 in the common year, the half-orc warlord Turush Mak invaded the southern Wild Coast with his hordes of orcs, goblinoid and gnolls. The resident mercenaries either answered the clarion cry of war to defend northern towns, who were willing to pay exorbitant prices for experienced warriors, or went south and sold their services to the invading armies of the Pomage. This led Elredd poorly defended and, ironically, had to defend themselves against former citizens who were now part of the humanoid army sacking the city. Elredd crumbled, and when the dust settled, nothing but ruins remained. Tribes of goblins, kobolds, orcs and gnolls have claimed the city, and its former citizens now serve their conquerors as slaves, living in primitive shelters, shackled together, growing crops and tending small herds in the hills for their ever-hungry masters. They also aid in the excavation and rebuilding of the city, though now in the image of the Orcish Empire. The slaves must survive on poor bread, slop, vermin, grains they scrounge from the animal fodder, and spring water found in the hills. The evil humanoids care little if the slaves live or die, and as true carnivores, these taskmasters are happy to feast on dying slaves. Fear of this fate drives the slaves to cling tenaciously to life, despite the odds being stacked against them. Slavery does not end there, however. Even amongst the humanoids, near slavery is rampant. Goblins and kobolds are being oppressed, forced to labor at excavating the underground tunnels and fighting for whatever food is left. Fear of Turushmak's wrath and attacks from the human, dwarven or elven forces from the free lands is the only thing that binds these disparate tribes together. The port town suffered a fate similar to that of the city. Although the port was picked clean of valuables, property damage was kept to a minimum by command of Turushmak himself. Thus, unlike the city of Elredd, the port survived largely unscathed. Today, a few humanoid guardsmen lounge around, not particularly concerned about who enters or leaves. A powerful odor of salt and old fish blows up from the docks. Garbage and dead fish float on the surface of the harbor. The port of Elredd is a dank and reeking place. Following the capture of this port, Turushmak commissioned the construction of a naval force. He wanted his forces to be able to prowl the waters of the woolly bay and pluck rich cargo from the fat merchant ships. He also wanted to build a defense to check the attacks of the hardy marines, who had denied him other ports during the war. By 585 of the common year, a navy was well under construction, and the port of Elredd was fortified on land by strong walls, trebuchets, heavy catapults and other war machines, and by sea 12 orc pirate ships under the command of the infamous Davis the Reaver patrol the waters 30 miles to either direction from the city. From his commanding flagship, the Sea Dragon, the tough, bull-headed captain shows off his power through deeds and stylish clothes and equally stylish beard. His crews are composed of a mix of fierce orc tribesmen and unscrupulous human sailors. Davis may be a fearsome warrior, he has proved himself to be an unimpressive strategist. This naval force has harried shipping in the Woolly Bay for the last 6 years, but so far has failed to become a substantial threat. The defense by walls and ships is not the only defense. By air, a crack force of Dragonel riders keep the ships of the hardy marines away. These Dragonels drop rocks and flaming pots from the air that smash completely through the ship's hull. A Flan settlement used to be located inland from Elredd. Scholars are unsure if Flan lived there when the forest still stretched to the sea. Someone or something destroyed the settlement, however, leaving behind only remnants of their civilization. The most prominent feature is a low, crumbled, stacked stone wall. These ruins became a hideout for bandits, cutthroats, and thieves, and as success grew, powerful leaders organized the ragtag bandits. A town of outcasts, ruffians, and slaves emerged. It received the name Badwall. The early days of Badwall are steeped in legend and horror. There are tales of piracy, plundering, defilement, and murder so lascivious that it would make an executioner blush. What it has evolved into is not much better, but the organized criminal groups that have emerged keep a semblance of order. Badwall is essentially controlled by several organized gangs that have split the small town into territories, each controlling a different economic aspect of the town. It does still allow the dark pleasures that pass for commerce here, but the town always has the feel of a tinder twig, ready to ignite. There is an uneasy truce that exists between them, and twice a year the gang leaders all meet in the tavern of the Black Blade to negotiate, haggle, and bring up grievances. Most of the time, these are all settled diplomatically. Other times, an all-out street war follows. In 585, the waves of orcs completely wiped out the town and have taken it as their own base of operations. Some bandits on the coast, however, tell tall tales that the town has not been destroyed at all, but that the Badwall gangs pay the orcs in gold, information, and precious goods. Well, to know the truth is to venture out and see. The coastal city of Fax was a free and independent city that was doing quite well. It was surrounded by fiax, or rough grass, that could be woven into products, such as baskets. The river that runs from the Sus through Fax didn't only make the city picturesque, it brought inland products as far as the forest to Fax's markets. Merchant ships who regularly stopped in the safe Fax Harbor Bay could not resist Fax's markets, and the city prospered year on year. This prosperity ended, however, when they were driven out in 584 by the evil humanoid armies, and today Fax is a broiling, boiling, oozing sore on the face of the Flanness. Not only is it occupied by orcs, goblins, bugbears, ogres, gnolls and the like, but its deep water harbour is also a pirate's den for slavers, raiders and smugglers. Hundreds of taverns and brothels cram the ill-conceived, ramshackle streets and alleys. There is no law or order to speak of, and death is around every corner. The bay is actually still a great place for merchants of strong stomach and stout heart to unload their goods, legal or illegal, because Fax has no organized system of taxation. Whenever the city needs something, a collection is taken from ruffians and pirates, or by raiding coastal towns. Cantona was originally a fishing village, founded around 370 in the common year, which grew into a trading station of nearly 600 residents by the time a soul mage named Valterra settled here in the year 495. History notes that he was rather paranoid and bought several buildings in the middle of town, only to tear them down and rebuild them to unique specifications. These buildings were asymmetrical, used strange angles, and were decorated with enchanted woods, ensorcelled paints and magical mortars. Tales go around that the buildings were immune to various invasive magics, and over the decades this magic degraded, and when the mage died the magic went totally awry, and in the end affected the entire city and the surrounding lands. All magic used within the area today has a high chance to either failing, backfiring or changing effect. Since then, the town became a haven for those who hate magic, and they kept building the town into an important trade station. Piers were rebuilt into stone piers to better service merchant ships and fishing ships, and the log walls were fortified with larger towers. In 584, the town's population of 1,100 was besieged by humanoid armies of the Pomarch. This time, however, the anti-magical properties of Cantona worked against its citizens, as the orcish advantage of numbers could not be countered by magic. The town quickly fell and about half of the residents fled to Safeton. The others were killed or captured by the orcs. The control over Cantona, now in ruins, is left to an orc named Rakurish Lemnak, who ordered extensive tunnels to be dug beneath the city. He rebuilt some vital defense towers, and although 3 sunken ships blocked the town's piers, he ordered most of the wreckage to be removed to allow use of the outer portions of the north and south piers. The thriving orc community lives both above and below ground, using slaves for menial labor, sports and sacrifices. Though there is less to pillage following the conquest, his troops sometimes catch bandits and humans for sport. As the number of slaves declined, the orc leaders had to restrict the consuming of human flesh to their monthly celebrations, and forced to look elsewhere for suitable meat. Slavers use Cantona as a stopping point to their way down the wild coast to Elredd, and drop off liquor, plus any slaves that won't survive the rest of the journey. Carefully reading every paragraph and looking at every map, the scholar taps her finger on the words Holdings of Safeton. About half a century after the Sul Imperium was burned to ash by the rain of colorless fire, a large group of Sul wanderers settled atop a low ridge overlooking this inlet of the Woolly Bay. Exiles and vagabonds all, they were determined to claim a new home for themselves and in some way live up to the dimly remembered glories. Stone was abundant, and the simple settlement quickly evolved into a fortified town, solidifying their survival against the numerous bands of marauders that roamed the lands. The settlers were fierce in the defense of their new home, and it became known as Safetown, nowadays known as Safeton. The loose alliance of families that came to form the town's nobility ensured that it remained safe from attack from without. However, the haphazard attitude of the old families to lawmaking meant that walking the streets of Safeton could be anything but safe. Might made right here, and the old families had might to spare. Along with fishing, trade, brigandage, and in later years piracy filled Safeton's coffers. Farming and quarrying have continued throughout, and like their forefathers, the Sul of Safeton still use slaves to work their quarries and fields. Safeton's climate is that of a typical coastal temperate, with one notable exception. During the months of Gutmund and Harvester, a powerful southeasterly wind blows in from the sea. The Safeton Physic, as the gale is known, begins to blow just after noon and continues until late in the night. It takes its name from the belief that the wind blows away disease and detritus from the poorer parts of the city. It makes piloting and sailing out of port somewhat more hazardous during that time. Life in the city has changed considerably after the expanded Orc Empire marched within sight of the city walls. The 6,000 or so inhabitants have become even more paranoid, and you can smell the fear in the streets. Safeton concluded pacts of association with Greyhawk in Cold Even of 584 to protect the holdings. Greyhawk offered to administer city law, extract tax and tribute in return of military help and stationing a garrison. Faced with onslaught from the Pomage, the rulers felt they had no choice. Safeton became a frontier town, and not in a good way. Many of the native folk are hard of character, and some of them are as brutal as any orc bandit pillaging and slaying farmsteads. Safeton and Narwell both had significant humanoids among their population before the wars, but this changed during the infamous Night of Terror, early in 584. Every orc, half-orc or hobgoblin in Narwell and Safeton was knifed, lynched or burned alive. The only thing keeping any sort of peace on the streets here are the 600 Greyhawk militiamen and the 3 Harby war galleys stationed here. They train Safeton men-at-arms in the hard military duties expected of them under the new conscription law. Nowadays, there are even nighttime curfews outside the notorious Dock District, that is, where the militia do not patrol. A complete wooden stockade wall has been erected, and within that a stone wall is being built with 2 massive entry gates. Greyhawk law does not allow slavery, but the slaves have been appropriated as workhouse billeted people for this essential construction work. Others are given virtually as slaves to communities within the wild plains, where they serve as guards and border lookouts, although still shackled. Many die first whenever raiders attack the communities, but they're considered expendable. Life in the penal militias is often brutish and short. The men within them are usually black-hearted brigands. From the springtime of 585 onwards, a fluid border exists just south of Safeton, between the domain of Greyhawk and the Orcish Empire. This zone is one in which Greyhawk militias make organized strikes with 50 to 80 strong squads, and where control is disputed between humanoids from the Pomage, bandits, elves, and even a few determined local farm folk still hanging on to their homes. Because the buffer zone is so fluid, it is hard to give special detail about it, but 4 locations illustrate vividly the kind of struggle that takes place in this area. Castle Sulafreit used to be the home of a robber baron, and the castle was looted and pillaged by the orcs, but its stone walls and keep remained mostly intact. Since that time, either humanoids, bandits or Harby have been in control of it. Lerezen is a stone keep atop a dungeon complex. The catacombs are rumored to contain restless undead, and none dare come near it, especially after the reputed death of its long-time resident necromancer. The Stalkara estates of some 30 square miles is still owned by the well-known wealthy bandit Stalkara family. They still live in the well-defended fortified manor house. They fight the red-eyed vermin tooth and nail, vowing not to yield an inch of property to the humanoids and using all kinds of traps to make their point. A fortified village of 165 folk. Wyvernen is a strange mix. It includes a few farmers, a few bandits, some raiders, a few peat diggers in the unique sunken peat box north of the village, and a family of cutthroat gnomes who fled from Safeton. Ruling the community with a rod of iron, forbidding anyone from fleeing, is Hendred Bleret, a priest of Hextor, who rides a trained wyvern and has an intense hatred of orcs. He constantly urges the village men to prepare for battle and makes impassioned speeches, luridly laced with images of orcish blood washing down the stone and wooden wall that now encircles Wyvernen. The locals have high morale and feeling of pride at the ease with which they fought off the orcs, and they sneer at refugees from less fortunate places. Wyvernen still manages to earn a little money selling peat to Safeton for fuel, although Hendred refuses to allow Greyhawk militia into the area around the village. The territory of Narwell has a very different atmosphere to Safeton and has more open spaces and bordering into farmlands. While Safeton is brute force and strength, Narwell is a subtler, wilier kind of city. It has evil folk aplenty, but they tend to be thieves and bandits rather than the brutish men of Safeton. Walls are still under construction, and that says a lot about the priorities of the city. Law here is not as strict as in Safeton. For example, there is conscription but no curfews. Rumor has it that Narwell bandits always manage to avoid the militia patrols, and the Baron seems to be as affluent as he ever was. The militia who patrols the gnarly forest have 3 bases, and the garrison of Narwell is one of them. The militia here are tough but honorable, and they patrol the western and central areas of the Wild Plains, as well as the upper eastern fringe of the Welkwood, as far as Castle Mestrine. They train local militias in outlying farm communities and give help in constructing defenses, also acquiring information and liaising with local landholders. The total garrison size is 350 men, excluding the about 50 Narwell headhunters. The famous Narwell headhunters are a specialist division of the Narwell's militia. The headhunters' specific brief is to actively track down and bring to justice bandits who commit acts of looting, pillaging or violence against the communities of the Wild Plains or the allied cities. More so than other areas on the Wild Coast, Narwell also suffers from what they call dirty rain, which is actually dust from the bright desert that has been blown west over the bay. The plains near Narwell and Safeton are called the Wild Plains. The settlement pattern here is quite variable. Some lands are freeholdings, small groups of farmers who now band together for self-defense. Other lands are held by petty nobles who often squabble with each other. Others still are bandit thieves or fiercely independent guild-run villages and small towns. Rulership changes frequently as one bandit is killed off by another, or a minor noble dies in a tragic hunting accident, and his lands are taken over by a greedy neighbor. If you made it this far and enjoyed my video, please leave a comment and show your support by ringing that bell icon. I want to thank everyone that is already supporting me by sharing my content on other platforms, liking the videos and spreading the lore. I especially want to thank the members that sponsor my work and help me keep my gear and software running. If you want to interact more with me, head over to my community tab here on YouTube, or go to the website where you can also join the league and decide on future videos through the sponsor meters. Links are in the description. On a final note, I do not know all the artists whose work I used in this video, but if you are the artist or know who it is, please let me know so I can give the proper credit.